This is a Film Stories original podcast.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Xcast X-Files Podwatch. This is episode 53, and today we're covering Emily and Kitsunegari. I'm your host, Carl Sweeney, and I'm joined from across the pond by Chris Knowles. Hey, Chris.
Hello, Carl.
So we're in early to mid Season 5 here. So Emily's the first episode. Episode 7 of Season 5. Aired in December 97. And this was written by Vince Gilligan, John Scheiben and Frank Spotnitz, and directed by Kim Manners. Now, this is the episode which follows on from Christmas Carol, and it sees Scully attempting to adopt Emily Sim, who's also deathly ill, it turns out. I think I'll just preface what I'm going to say by saying I really, really like Christmas Carol, and I think you're on the same page as me.
It's my favorite X-Files episode, which most people just, they have a hard time wrapping their head around, but yeah, that's my favorite X-Files episode.
Whoa, so you're even more positive about it than me then?
Yeah, I think it's... I never get tired of watching that episode. I think it might be in the hundreds by now. I just think that is just a perfect hour of television. Just amazing. I mean, even though it doesn't have David in it, I don't know. It's so real. And the thing is that it's so real that it makes everything else that's happening around it, by extension, feel that much more real. I mean, it's so beautifully rendered. It's so true. The interpersonal relationships and, the conflicts within the family and, the whole X-Files maxim of show don't tell. So if Mama Scully's mad at Bill, she just shoots him a, withering glance rather than, 5 minutes of, dressing him down. So yeah, I think that is an absolutely, brilliant, episode. And I think John Piper Ferguson was just astonishingly good.
Now I'm going to come on to him, so let's part that thought for a second. Yeah, now, we've talked before about some of the 2- and 3-part episodes of The X-Files, and some of them really do feel like a cohesive whole. Now, what about this one then? So Christmas Carol into Emily, I think there's a bit of a drop-off in quality. I feel like there's a kind of tension sort of between the two episodes at times, and also within Emily, there's some scenes which are kind of at variance with some of the others, So, like, when Mulder goes slapping the Doctor around and stuff, I'm not really into that kind of thing. It sort of feels like there's kind of a bog-standard, run-of-the-mill mythology episode trying to come out in Emily, whereas Christmas Carol, it was, so unique and really was its own thing. So I think the second part here is far inferior to the first. What do you think?
I wouldn't say it's far inferior. I mean, there are some really beautifully written sequences, particularly the interplay between Scully and Mulder in the hospital and that doctor, who I just thought was just put in a brilliant performance. Yeah. It felt like we were watching the outtakes from Terma at times. I was kind of like, didn't we sort of see all this before? It just felt a bit rote, a bit of a replay. I mean, I think it's very well written. It's very tight. There are some really beautiful, dramatic moments. But as a whole, it doesn't follow on cohesively, in plot or in tone or even in directorial style. I mean, it looks completely different visually. It just has a different feel. It's almost like they were using a different grain of film or a different stock of film. It seems like it's not exactly a two-parter. It's just an episode that explored one theme and plot, and those themes sort of carried over into, like you said, this bog standard kind of mythology episode. At the same time, I mean, it's well done. It sort of drives the overall narrative along. I mean, some of the ideas that are explored in that episode show up, in Patient X and Red and the Black, which is, very pivotal two-parter, much more momentous. It's interesting because Christmas Carol and Emily tends to get overlooked. There was a lot of negative fan reaction, particularly from the shippers at the time.
What was kind of the gist of the negative reaction exactly?
Well, they didn't like the fact that there was somebody else besides Mulder so deeply involved in the investigation. I mean, that's for starters, and that's a given. And it's always, Chris Carter is doing this to us. It's never like, David was busy doing reshoots for the movie. Right. It's always like, why is he doing this to us?
Yeah.
The typical kind of internet thing. But there was also, in this two-parter as a whole, there was kind of a sense that this was just more Scully torture porn.
Right.
This is just more Scully being put these emotional ringer. But, here's the thing. I mean, Gillian Anderson played those notes really well.
Yes.
I mean, she really shines here. I think I would say without hesitation that her best performance in the entire series is in Christmas Carol. She has a lot less to do. This is more of a Mulder-driven episode. But, it's just like, okay, we had this momentous, really anomalous family drama, for the Christmas episode. And then it's just, it's back to business. It's a new year. They did have a problem here, too. I think a lot of fans might know about this, but the girl who originally was cast to play Emily shot a number of scenes and then decided out of the blue that she was just going to have screaming fits on set, that she was terrified and she didn't want to do it anymore. And so they recast the part, and that actress who plays Emily was just a few months earlier, I guess, was on an episode of Millennium called Monster.
Yes, yeah.
Which is a very good episode that people should all watch.
Yep, I agree.
I think it was like one of the most expensive post-production jobs that the X-Files ever had to do, because they literally had to paint this girl out of the shots and paint this new girl into the shots digitally. It was, it was extraordinarily painstaking. I mean, it would probably be, you could do it more easily today, with the advanced technology. But at the time, it was excruciating, and it was a real crisis. I mean, Bob Goodwin said it was one of the toughest days of his career on the X-Files when he had to fire this poor girl, and he just felt horrible and miserable afterwards. So it was very challenging and difficult.
It's interesting, actually, because I didn't know that until I came across that story when I was reading about this episode yesterday. And I'd have to go back and look at the two episodes, but I never got the sense watching Christmas Carol and Emily that I was watching something that had been patched together,
No, it's extraordinarily well done.
Hats off to everyone involved with that, I suppose. Okay, just a couple of things about Emily before we move on to Kitsunegari. So, in the first part, obviously Scully rubs up against this character, Detective Kresge.
One thing I just want to drop in before you get started on that is that the teaser is obviously a Chris Carter script. And one of the things that people don't really understand about the visual motif they were using in the teaser is that I've talked about this whole through line with the X-Files about what are called the mystery religions. And when you see Scully dressed in sort of this Greco-Roman attire wandering through a desert, what that is directly referencing is Demeter's search for Persephone. And this was one of their mystery religions where it's based on the earth goddess, and her daughter is kidnapped and taken down to hell. And she goes searching, across the world for her. And as she's searching, all the crops wither and soil turns to dust and so on and so forth. So, I mean, this is just another clue that this is what's sort of underpinning this mythology is a much older mythology. But go on. John Piper Ferguson.
Yeah, well, that's interesting what you say about the teaser here, because I didn't know that, but I do like the image of the teaser. I think it's very, I don't know if beautiful is the word, but I like the visual anyway.
The visual's gorgeous, yeah.
Yeah, John Piper Ferguson. So I think it was actually you who pointed this out to me, but his character, Kresge, it's kind of a shame that he disappears a bit in this one. He does pop up, but not as much as he did in Christmas Carol. But he's kind of like a prototype of Doggett, isn't he, in some ways? How would you sort of characterize that?
Well, it's interesting because, behind the scenes at the time, there was a lot of question as to whether David Duchovny was actually going to stay on full time and things like that. I mean, there was a lot of back and forth about whether or not they should actually stay in Vancouver. Chris Carter especially really wanted to stay in Vancouver. I mean, he was very adamant about it. He really didn't want to move the show down to LA. And you really get the sense that, while David's off doing reshoots, that they're like, well, let's see if we can try this guy out just in case we need somebody to step in at the last minute. And you kind of get that sense. I think he had a terrific chemistry with Gillian Anderson. I think he would have made a great dog, personally. I think the network probably wanted somebody, with a little more marquee value. Yes. But I think John Piper Ferguson is a terrific actor. I think he had tremendous chemistry, of his own type. Certainly not the Mulder-Scully chemistry, but they definitely had their own chemistry together. I think they played off really well together in Christmas Carol. And it was kind of, he's just kind of tossed aside because David's back. I had mentioned before in Wet Wire that you have the plainclothes man.
Yes. Yep.
And basically what had happened is that all those lines and scenes that he plays up until the very end were all supposed to be X.
Yep.
But X, Stephen Williams was busy doing something else and couldn't make the shoot in time, so they gave his lines to another actor. So I wonder if this is like the script was originally written for Mulder. That Mulder was supposed to play this part because he's, don't forget, this is the skeptical Mulder era.
Yes. Yeah.
The very short-lived skeptical Mulder era. So, I do wonder if, the script was originally written for Mulder and then rewritten for this other, character played by this actor who looks not, entirely unlike David Duchovny because, of shooting obligations. And in these kind of things with like shooting obligations, this is the kind of thing that pops up at the last minute. It's like, oh crap, David's not going to be available because they have to reshoot him falling down, that little cubby hole in the alien spaceship for, 5 days, whatever. What are we going to do? Well, this is what we're going to do. We're going to create this new character and blah, 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 blah. So it definitely feels like that. I mean, it definitely feels like the way those two characters interact was probably originally written for Mulder and Scully. And then because everybody at 1013, really likes John Piper Ferguson. I mean, when I spoke to Chris Carter, he spoke very, very highly of him. He said he was part of the family. They just gave him a few scenes to play in Emily. They seem very obligatory. And that's, like I said, I really feel that those scenes are just an excuse to give him more screen time.
All right. So finally, on the subject of Emily, what do you think of the conclusion to the episode? With Emily dying and so on. Do you think that was an appropriate way to end it?
Well, it's kind of the thing. Like, what else are they going to do? I mean, they're going to have like Scully having to like care for his sick child for the rest of the 5th season. I think that was a foregone conclusion. It seemed a bit abrupt. Maybe they should have sold it a bit more convincingly, played it out a bit more, stretched it out a bit more. But, this is television. A lot of things happen at the last minute, and you can't always do the things you really would like to do. So, I mean, whatever criticism you have of Emily, it's all very well done. I mean, it's all just, this is the X-Files at their quintessence, at their peak. I mean, this is when every cylinder is firing. This is when all the horses are riding. I mean, this is a machine like few others television or even the movies have seen. These are incredibly hardworking, incredibly intelligent people, all working towards the same goal. And it's, even when it's not very interesting, the plot or the story or the case, it's just a pleasure to watch it all unfold,
Kitsunegari is episode 8 of the 5th season. This was aired in January of 98 and was written by Vince Gilligan and Tim Minyar and directed by Daniel Sackheim. And this, of course, is the episode that sees the return of Robert Patrick Modell, aka Pusher. Now then, Chris, I mean, they're pretty cautious, the X-Files, generally, with bringing back characters. They only did it sort of sparingly, but they brought back Pusher. How well do you think Kitsunegari came out?
Love it. Sometimes I think I like it better than Pusher, which I know is heresy.
It's a bold statement. So what do you like about it so much then? Because I think for a lot of fans, this is an episode that doesn't get talked about too much, and it's rare to hear people talk about it as being as good as Pusher, if not better. So, how do you see it exactly?
I don't know if it's necessarily better. It's different. It feels very much like an 80s movie for some reason. I can't really put my finger on it. I mean, maybe it's because, Diana Scarwood's in it, and she's fantastic, by the way. But there's something about the way this all plays out that reminds me of and the only movie that comes to mind and bears absolutely no similarity to this is a movie like you would go see movies in the 80s like Jagged Edge or Fatal Attraction, that genre of film, Presumed Innocent, which was just something that would play now on television, but people would go see these movies that, were just, based on novels or whatever and adult stories and things like that. I think the thing that I'm sort of getting goosebumps thinking about it now is, the whole idea of mind control is terrifying, and the way they handle it is extraordinarily effective. I'll tell you the scene that just sticks out in my mind when I think of this episode is the scene when Mulder is in the hospital room, looking in at Modell.
Yeah.
And the nurse comes in and says, "Excuse me, sir, I have to take blood," or whatever she has to do. And he goes, "Okay." And then when he walks past her, we see it's the sister, Linda Bowman with nurse stapled to her chest with a safety pin. And that's just that scene terrifies me. I don't know what exactly it is. I mean, maybe it's just the look on her face, which is just, she plays it so beautifully, but it's terrifying. It terrifies me. I just when I think about that and, the shootout, I'm Scully. That's not Scully, it's just all this sort of thing. It's just what is reality? Somebody manipulating your mind to the point that you can't even perceive what's in front of you. I think it's handled a little bit more effectively here. I mean, Pusher is a fantastic episode. It's very well written, but somehow in this episode, I feel like we get more of a sense of the POV of the people who are actually experiencing these hallucinations. And I think that makes it a little bit more effective to me. It's just Pusher, we're sort of seeing the story unplay through his point of view, and we're not really getting a sense of what these people, his victims, are experiencing. And I feel like you get more of a sense of that in Kitsunegari, which is probably the reason, I actually, prefer it, even though I wouldn't necessarily say it's better or this or that. I just feel like the whole idea of what's happening to these people just seems to come across more effectively here.
Yeah, that's an interesting take on it. I think for me, Pusher just has kind of a kinetic energy and a sense of verve that this one doesn't quite capture. But what I do like about it is that some of the characters initially act as if they're in, a larger scale Pusher sequel. So, they're really talking this guy up and everything. And, the briefing Mulder and Scully give everybody at the start. But actually, I like the way the episode reckons with the fate they left Modell with at the end of Pusher. It doesn't try to pretend that, he's fine and it's just something that can be passed off. No, he is very ill,
But he's very powerful still. Another scene that just, I can't believe how powerful and effective it was, and just how it still gives me chills, is when he goes up to the cop sitting outside the safe house and he goes, "Go home." And the guy goes, "What?" And he just says, "Go home." And that's the end of it. It's just something about that just scares the hell out of me.
Yeah, it's very well performed, isn't it, this episode?
Yeah, and the whole thing with the blue paint. Oh, I'll tell you the other scene that just terrified me at the time is when Mulder is at the physical therapist's office.
Oh, yes.
And she's just having this very bland, obligatory conversation on the phone, and then she just walks over and just electrocutes herself.
Yeah, I think that's the best scene in the episode, personally. I think it's really well played, how she's kind of just looking for her glasses and stuff. It's a nice bit of physical acting, and terrific scene. It was interesting you mentioned the ending earlier, because I came across a quote from Vince Gilligan which said that the ending of this episode was another thing that was kind of not thrown together, but it came very late in the process, so they were looking at locations, and I guess the director was saying, what's going to happen here, and Vince Gilligan still didn't have the answer, so I think it's surprising sometimes when you read about these episodes, you sort of assume they sort of come out fully formed, but there's a lot of sort of down to the wire decisions being made on the series.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there are episodes that Chris Carter is rewriting, at, the the crew will all be waiting on standby because a scene is being rewritten, and like Chris Randall's like typing away, and then emails it to Bob Goodwin. It's just like that kind of thing, and that's the pressure of television. It's I can't believe so there's all these great television shows now, right? But people don't understand that it's not. These shows really aren't produced the way television used to be produced. These shows are all produced like movies are produced, where you have all the time in the world to do whatever you want. And, when you're ready, you give it to the network and they air it. That's not how the X-Files. So people will say, oh, well, this is better than the X-Files, this is better than the X-Files, blah, blah, blah. It's like, you don't understand how the X-Files was produced. It's like these guys were under the gun constantly.
Is there anything else you wanted to chip in about Kitsunegari?
No, I just think it's a real solid episode. Tends to get overlooked, which I find kind of sad. I think it's an episode that everyone should watch, because I think anybody who likes the X-Files is going to enjoy that episode.
Yes, it's a good episode. I think so too. I think Pusher is the better episode, but yeah, it's good to hear from someone who's like really madly keen about it, because like you say, it's not one you hear too much talk about, sadly.
No, I'm madly keen about the pretty much the entire season.
So tomorrow it's Schizogeny and Chinga, obviously the Stephen King episode. In the meantime, listeners, find us on Twitter at the usual place, at the X_cast. Find us on Facebook, type in Xcast and you'll find us there. But until next time, trust no one.